What's up, guys? This is Blank Boy, and today I want to talk about a lot of things. I want to talk about cognitive type and Vultology, just in general, I guess. Um, First, I want to talk about what I see as particularly impressive, and then I want to talk about some critiques, some criticisms of cognitive type. I'm not going to get into super nuanced topics where you need to have a good understanding of Vultology. Maybe I'll do that later, but not today. So first, as far as the good, what's the good in Vultology and cognitive type? I think really like the main draw, which we also see as the main draw to something like OPS, is objectivity, right? Can you determine psychological type without some kind of subjective bias? And right, it just, the field of psychology, you could say, is plagued with subjective bias, because I am a person who's listening to your words and determining what this all means for you, for your mental state, for the status of your mental state as disordered or not disordered. And in having the Vultology code, the CT, VC, the Cognitive Type Vultology Codex, or it's just code, whatever, that gives us a grounding point, right? This thing is, okay, cool, it's grounded in something that is not so interpretive. As the code continues undergoing revisions, I think it's on like version 3 now. As it continues undergoing revisions, it seems to get less interpretive, less subject to interpretation. And I'll talk a little bit more about the roots and why maybe, version 1 or, proto version 1 was perhaps a little more interpretive than you'd like. Then what is really impressive to me is the identical twins pilot study, which ended up demonstrating that this thing does have a basis in biology, that the type of two identical twins will be identical even if they were separated from birth and they grew up totally apart in entirely different contexts. Now, one of the findings from that study was actually rather disappointing for a lot of people. And this was that these twins who were separated at birth, not only do they have the same types, but they have the exact same development. And so now this study was a little bit old. This was the schema for determining developments was a little bit different than it is now. But that said, it showed that, all right, identical twins, regardless of how they were raised, apart or together, have identical developments. And this was really disappointing because, well, it shows that, oh, is development just also biological? Is that also just written into your genes, so you don't get to decide development? Is that how that works? And granted, that was a pilot study, and again, the way of determining developments was a little bit older now. But if that ends up holding true in the future, yeah, that's going to be a really disappointing finding. That, I don't know, it sort of makes the name development seem wrong, just because, well, did they really develop to be that way, or is it just, I don't know, some kind of Yeah, subtype, whatever you want to call that. So one more thing about the pros, some of the stuff that's really exciting to come out of cognitive type is the discovery of directive extroverted feeling. And there's a lot to say about this. For one, all right, there is now a new finding, a new discovery in the space of personality typology. Um, I really see this as one of the only real discoveries in this space since like Carl Jung, that, okay, awesome. There are, yeah, there are the thing that we call FE, that thing has a whole nother dimension to it that is not so simplistic, really as simplistic as Carl Jung made it seem. If you go back and read chapter 10 of Psychological Types, and if you read over the extroverted feeling attitude bit, it really is a lot closer to the FE that everyone else knows, everyone else is used to. And he really makes no mention of directive FE. This is not something that he predicts in these types or with this attitude. It's not. And so to make this discovery and say, hey, here's an improvement somewhere where Carl Jung was just totally wrong. Wow, I think that's really something, really showing us how multifaceted FE is, and not just this, simple, like, I don't know, people pleaser type thing. So really cool, really cool. Now, where this gets messy. So okay, that's me like praising the thing. Where this gets messy is when you think about the names of these things. So a very common problem that shows up is that of connotations, or I sometimes like to call this linguistic baggage, where it's very unfortunate that the terms that cognitive type uses to describe things are identical to the terms in all the other Jungian, neo-Jungian theories, whatever you want to call them. And this is not really like any fault of Auburn's. Like, he's tried to fix this. Like in his 2016 book, he was trying to name things differently. He was trying to name types things like Halevin and Melier. And more recently, he's come up with names for the functions like V minus and R plus. And he's even come up with a separate name for just the Vultological layer, that someone might be a reactive, rigid, candid, grounded person. And that describes just the Vultological layer, just their physically being those four things. And so I want to give him credit for that. Yeah, he's trying to solve this problem. Awesome. The problem is that none of these terms catch on, right? None of them caught on. Everyone in that space still uses names like FE and TI. And where I see this being a problem is that it causes so much unnecessary confusion. Like, a lot of people come in and they're trying to learn, and they have this sense that they already know what things mean. Or even after that, even after reading through like a bunch of the cognitive type articles about, hey, here's what that word used to mean and what you think it means, here's what we mean and how it is actually used. Even after reading something like that, oftentimes people cannot entirely get rid of their previous way of thinking about these things. And so in seeing, let's just stick with FE as an example. and seeing that it has both this adaptive and directive side, still all their ideas about the adaptive side are the same. Or if they're not exactly the same, they're colored by old things that they've thought. And so if what cognitive type is looking at is truly new, which I really see it as new and really challenging what Carl Jung himself said about a lot of this stuff. If it's really new and challenging those notions, then really we should treat it like it's new, like it's not exactly those things. And with them sharing the exact same name as something else, I do see it as hindering understanding and creating false understanding. People think that they understand something when they don't. To the best of your ability, you're trying to understand this thing anew, but the connotations are just there. They won't go away, right? That's the power of a connotation. So I really do see that as a problem. Again, not that Auburn doesn't and hasn't tried many times to squash that one. Then another criticism, something that I hear kind of often, is that the origins of Vultology are in vibe typing, right? Which is not a good place to have origins, right? The origins are in vibe typing, and that like really there's no precedent for seeing physical movement out of a person and saying, okay, we can learn something psychological about them from that. Now, as far as the vibe typing goes, yeah, that is true. That is the origin. And this goes back to a point that I was mentioning earlier, that, yeah, version 1 or, pre-version 1 was maybe a little bit interpretive. And, the original vibe typing pod layer terminology was very interpretive. I think one of the great things that, that Auburn's been doing is building up a really big GIF library, or some people say GIF, I say GIF, where there's a lot of examples of signals. And I'll be honest, a lot of signals are ambiguous. Some signals, I think very few signals, if any, in the Model 3 or whatever, the Vultology Code 3, where there used to be a lot of signals that were, some are literally interpretive in that they were called a psychological signal, or a just like an audio signal, so some type of words that people are using, and right, that sort of thing is definitely going to be interpretive, but also just some signals being more anatomical in nature, and that, well, wait, the maybe the skin around my eyes just happens to do a kind of thing, but okay, that's just the anatomy. That's the face I was born with. Sorry. Where I think the main source of truth, the source of signal in the Vultology code, is in the dynamic signals, in the ways that people move. And really, originally, the anatomical signals were just supposed to be sort of, okay, that's how your muscles have been moving over time. Then the ones that have been exercised, okay, there will be some muscle there. The ones that have not, there will not be muscle there. That sort of thing, not necessarily exactly that. And then, yeah, so the origins look a little sketchy, but I think that the Vultology code has come a long way since then. I think this is like a teachable and learnable method and not just for people in hooded robes behind closed doors to see the truth themselves, and oh, you can't understand the vibes, like something like that. No, I don't think that's true at all. As for there being no precedent for that kind of thing, I actually think that there is quite a bit of a precedent, not in this exact same way, because of course, right, I mean, this is an entirely new space, but there are now things like EMDR that I've mentioned in a past video, where something about the way that you are moving, in this case your eyes, is going to affect your psychology. So that's sort of the opposite direction of that relationship. But right, one of the core hypotheses in cognitive type is that there is a bidirectional relationship between mind and body, this expression layer of Vultology, of processing. And I mean, right, the off-cited thing is that like 70% of communication is body language. And okay, if that's really true, then something is being communicated in that 70%, even if we're, maybe a little more conservative. I don't know, let's call it 50%. Let's call it any amount, right? The amount of communication that you're getting through body language, okay, if it's communication, that's signal. That's not meaningless movement that doesn't mean anything. And right, we're not just talking about like hand gestures like this or whatever. Right, body language is a lot of things. Then probably the most obvious example of where there is precedent for this sort of thing is the work by Paul Ekman and colleagues to demonstrate the universality of emotional expression. And that, of course, this is different in kind in that Vultology is asserting that there are expressions that are not universal. And with emotional expression, it was the exact opposite, that these expressions are universal. Even so, all right, we've got universal expressions that are coming across on your face or your body that are telling us something about your mind, right? About something about the subjective experiences of the mind. So I mean, there's countless other examples that I could give, but I'm going to try to move on because I think I stopped here long enough. Actually, there's other points that I want to get to. So one of the big, maybe the biggest critique, if you ask me, for cognitive type is that of measuring the psychological significance of a type. So when someone is typed in Vultology, the Vultologists, they try to assess someone's psychology and figure out that, okay, hey, this is actually fitting, right? I'm not just dumping this blanket of a type onto you and okay, you're covered in it now, and yeah, hopefully that's a good fit. Oh, it's one size fits all, whatever. No, they're actually trying to say, hey, is this a good fit? And as far as, yeah, I mean, as far as just having a conversation with that person is concerned, cool, great, I guess that's fine. But as far as achieving scientific legitimacy, and of course, there's many other goals that you could be concerned with for something like this in the space of personality typology. But really, with this criticism, I'm purely speaking from a place of, hey, what's the best way forward for scientific legitimacy? And I don't see it currently as happening through things like the motif matrix and things like the mythological layer and archetypes. So in really in any science, I don't think that there's a mythological layer that people are proving, right? Maybe you could say in like cultural anthropology, but that's okay, that's fine. That's just like, reading texts or whatever. But if you're trying to say that, yes, look, this person embodies that mythos or that archetype, I don't think you're going to have a good time. As true as that may be to their subjective experience, and as great as it might be to want to be non-reductive about, everything that means. What does the embodiment of this mythos mean? Like that may be true to the subject, but if you're actually trying to attain scientific legitimacy, this may require some amount of reduction. And to talk about this, I'm just going to borrow a little bit from what I call the existing typology literature, which is the literature on psychological differences between men and women. So you could imagine saying that what the differences are between men and women is the embodiment of the divine masculine and the embodiment of the divine feminine. And yes, some people, embody both of these to a high degree, and some people maybe don't really embody either to a high degree. But that, you could say something like, on average, men, people who are of the male sex, embody the masculine archetype, and women embody the feminine archetype. You could say that, but if you go look at the literature, no one says that. That's not written anywhere. Instead, they end up measuring these things like, what's the average psychopathy in all the males and all the females, and what's the difference between there? What's the standard deviation? What is it on their conscientiousness or their agreeableness or their neuroticism, right? This sort of thing. And I totally get that, on a theoretical level, Auburn wants to say, hey, all that Big Five stuff, that's ultimately a dead end. And I'm trying to usurp the space that the Big Five lives in, and replace it with something better, something where we can have some theoretical understanding instead of just saying, oh, those are some traits you have. I think that's a great lofty goal for some time in the future. I think today, if you were trying to get something published, I think using the Big Five to say, something like, oh, look, people with a JE development have higher conscientiousness, or people who are JE lead have even higher conscientiousness than that, or something. I think those would be great, useful claims to make, doing the requisite study to make those claims. I think that would be great and much more measurable, quantifiable. Reductive, yes, unfortunately, but I think that's your in, and not the mythological layer. I don't see that happening. As cool as that would be, I'm not seeing it. Then let me just try to do one more criticism before I close this out. I can get into some more nuanced ones, at a later date. For today, I'm just going to mention ideas circulating around cognitive type, like energetic toll, ideas like function oscillation, ideas like compound functions. All right, what do these have in common? And I'm probably not listing all of them, but what these have in common is that they assert some sort of mechanistic happening on the side of the cognitive function. in sort of the cognitive layer, that some functions take more energetic toll than others, that some functions have a relationship with each other, a sort of oscillation relationship with each other, that some functions, in using that oscillation relationship, generate net effects that we can call compound functions. And while, of course, it's important to have hypotheses and be actively thinking about, where do we go? How do we study this thing? What do we look at? These three things are not really written about like hypotheses. And that's what I want to say. This is my criticism. They're written about much more like they are known, that it is known that this is how this stuff works, but it is not known. Compound functions are not confirmed that, that is exactly how they come about. Energetic toll, just because you can observe, let's say, a JI lead who's trying to push out and just sort of, not pushing out that much. I think it's not just a logical next step to say that that's energetic toll. I think there's a little bit of a leap, not a huge leap to say that that's, because that can only be one of a few things. Maybe energetic toll is one of them. Sure. But I don't see that written about as, oh, this is just a best guess, a hypothesis for now, that what's happening is that, that thing that in the Harold Grant stack we would say is the inferior function, that thing takes so much energetic toll that that's the reason you're seeing the expression come out that way. I want to see that phrased as a hypothesis. I don't want to see that phrased as this is the truth. This is known. We know that today. All right, so yeah. Cognitive type has some really cool, great things going on. Probably just the strongest one is that, all right, it is capable of making discoveries, right? If you start from the Vultological layer and you say, let's build up clusters of people who belong to these Vultology clusters, whatever you want to call those, and then we try to dive into those and see what's the difference between clusters, what's similar within everyone in a given cluster. You can actually make new discoveries, things that Carl Jung didn't even think about writing about, like directive FE. I think that's amazing. I don't think any other you don't see that anywhere else really. The way I see it, everything else is, let's define what is happening psychologically first. So we'll define the categories first, the psychological categories, and then we'll fit people in. And if someone mostly fits, but there's some, their foot is hanging out, then we'll do some mental gymnastics to shove that in there and say, oh no, look, they really do fit. So I think that's a great strength. But yeah, where I see weaknesses are, several places. General confusion surrounding names being kind of a big one, but also just how are we actually going to measure this stuff in a way that will not be, laughed out of a journal because it is mythological in nature. I think there's some improvements to be made there. Maybe in a later video, I can go into some of the more nuanced Vultological critiques, things like signal mixing, things like, we don't know how stable developments are, even if we know that, two identical twins at age 45 have the exact same development. We don't know how stable attitude is, so guarded and unguarded. There's some other stuff there, but all right, thanks for watching.